Hi, folks. This afternoon, I'm going to um, go through a poem with you, one that has I've revisited a lot over the years. Wallace Stevens, The Emperor of Ice Cream. Um, the essential line of interpretation that I'm going to be going through here is not entirely mine. I'm not going to take full credit for it. I I derived this, got this from the late great Tom Preston. Um, so a lot of credit needs to go to him. And Tom, wherever you are, I'm very grateful still to this day for everything that you taught to me, imparted to me over the many decades ago. Um, you know, and we shall see where this goes. Um, Let me share my screen. All right, you all should be able to see this screen now. Um, so just a little bit of background on the poem and also a bit of background on Stevens. This probably will not be the only video that I'll do on a Stevens poem uh, for this course for this summer um, 2024 poetry course at through the Texas A&M University San Antonio, the great TAMUSA, as we say, or Texas TAMU SA as the main campus says. But and for those of you who happen upon these recordings, if you're more than welcome to sort of look in, right? Because with the understanding that you're only getting sort of part of uh, part of the picture, right? Um, in any case, a little bit about the poem and about Stevens. Stevens is a bit of an interesting figure. He was not educated in a traditional manner and he did not follow a traditional path in terms of, pursuing academics and that sort of thing. He was an insurance salesman, and he he didn't really necessarily have an occasion to travel the world, so to speak. What he would do though is he would order a lot of items right from around the world, and he was very well read. Um, and what we have is a lot of his internal, you know, workings out of stuff, if you will. And he's writing within the early decades, first few decades of the 20th century, so roughly 100 years ago, is when he's really his first book, which comes out around, I want to say, and you can Google this and stump me on this, right? But I believe it came out around 1921 or so, 22. Anyway, but the poems in it, appeared in magazines like Poetry, for example. In the years leading up to his first collection, was called Harmonium, right? And he wanted his complete works to be called the whole harmonium. So he wanted his life's work to be sort of seen as this um, just sort of overarching development, right? Much like, of course, Walt Whitman in the Song of Myself, which I'll cover in part, hopefully in a future video, right? Or at least connect you with someone that maybe has more insight than I do, but we'll see, because Whitman is also really fun to look into. But as far as Stevens is concerned and this poem is concerned, right? This poem is of course in the same collection as the great Sunday Morning and other poems, really looking at um, what life means after the Great War being World War One, where the world saw devastation at a level that they'd never seen before. and technology used in such horrendous to such horrendous ends, right? With chemical warfare and trench warfare and so on, right? So what I'm going to do, and bear with me because I am not the most expert reader, but I'm going to read the poem through, and then we're going to go through, and I'll go through the poem with you. So just bear with me, okay? Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let be the finale of scene. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the three glass knobs, that sheet on which you embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Now, if you heard me read this poem and or read this poem along with me, right? You might be going, what the hell is this about, right? And you would not be alone. If you looked at the poetry guide that's linked here next to this poem on Poetry Foundation, you will note that there are any number of interpretations given, right? Um, there's comparisons made with Hamlet, for example. There's a connection made with Anne of Green Gables, right? Uh, Helen Ven, the great Helen Vendler, by whom I was not trained, but one of my professors was, right? Uh, you know, uh, Says that this poem is essentially elusive, right? The meaning behind this poem. So but let's give it a shot. And again, this goes out to the late great Tom Preston, right? Um, but so call the roller of big cigars. So here in the first line, roller of big cigars. And again, with poetry, we want to think about detail. We want to think about imagery. That matters, right? We're wanting to get into uh, how to see everyday things potentially in new and exciting ways, right? That potentially change our perspective, right? Or at the very least, get us to think a little bit more deeply, right? Um, so call the roller of big cigars. When we think of big cigars, okay, look at the shape of a friend of mine just bought some Cubans, right? And you got them in this plastic sack, right? This airtight plastic sack, and they're long and thick. Okay, think about items, parts of the body, so on and so forth, that are long and thick. Okay, and also if you either grew up in the 1990s or like me or a young adult in the 1990s, right? I was in fact taking courses with Dr. Preston in the late 1990s. You may recall a cigar incident with former President Bill Clinton. Okay, so uh, you know, big cigars brings to mind phallic imagery, right? Among other things. Also, very masculine spaces. If you think about smoking cigars, right, you tend to think about a bunch of dudes like sitting around, maybe drinking some brandy or whatever and smoking a cigar. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But particularly during Stephen's time period, there were gentlemen's clubs, and these were not, what we would potentially attach that moniker to today, right? These were not clubs where women were, strippers dancing on poles and whatnot and what have you. These were clubs where men would sit around and smoke cigars and drink and potentially read the newspaper and talk about the day's affairs and that sort of thing, right? But again, masculine spaces. This is not the kind of space ultimately that we're talking about. We're talking about a masculine space, if you will, but we're not talking about a high class gentleman's club here, although the cigar would be um, potentially referencing something like that. Although in this context, as we'll see, it's more like, hey, we're not talking about a gentleman's club here. Okay, we're talking about something else. The muscular one, and bid him whip. So again, here we've got muscular associated with the roller of cigars, right? And bid him whip, right? So bid, of course, means to ask. Also, you get bid in terms of, making a bid, making an offer, a monetary offer, right? That could also be implicated here. We'll get to that in a little bit. But bid him whip. Now, again, a lot has not necessarily changed too much about the human species and the human psyche in 100 years. When you talk about whipping, you're talking about punishment. You're talking about, and in certain context, eroticism, right? Okay. Um, in kitchen cups, concupiscent curds. Now, if you are a student of Latin or a student of the history of the Code of Canon Law of the Catholic Church, right? Perhaps you know what concupiscent means. If you're like the rest of us, you had to look this up, or in my case, Dr. Preston looked it up. So concupiscent has to do with uh, sexual sin, right? It's a category. It has to do with a category of of um, of indiscretion, right? In according to the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so concupiscent curds. Now, you may have to Google this if you are not familiar with making your own cheese, which I have made my own cheese. I have the scars to prove it, because when you make cheese, when you make cheese by hand, you're pouring boiling milk mixed with some kind of acid, usually vinegar or lemon juice, into something that catches the curds, and the curds are fatty, globulous, and white, right? So think about, again, in the reference to in the reference to concupiscence, what might be related to something fatty that's globulous and white. Okay. Um, all right. So let me reread those first two lines, or first three lines, I'm sorry. Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip. In kitchen cups, concupiscent curds. All right. So that's essentially the first sentence. Let me go ahead and I'll move on to the next sentence, which is going to consist of the next three lines. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear. Let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Okay. So probably already you're going to you've gotten, and this is very well worth mentioning, right? This piece is very much from a male gaze, right? In very soon we'll see, quite literally, from a male gaze. This is, in other words, this is a male, very 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 male perspective, and not only a male perspective, but a particular male perspective. Um, in this poem, it becomes very problematic because women are not depicted well. Um, as we'll see, we see um, the word wenches. And if you're looking at the highlights here, these are not my highlights. These are highlights that other um, readers of Poetry Foundation have made, but they highlighted wenches, right? So, and wenches is not a, wench has never been a flattering term, right? In the English for women, right? So wenches dawdle, right? The dawdle is not a flattering movement either. It's kind of just a sort of a haphazard, very laborious type of movement. I do want to um call attention to the word let. Okay, so the word let here the highlight in blue is mine. The word let here is a conditional, right? It's conditional. And if you're familiar, those of you who have taken algebra, which is most of you, right, have taken algebra or higher math, and I'm not expert in higher math. I can kind of get my way around algebra one, high school wise anyway. I get my way around algebra one. But if you remember, um, with equations, you'll often hear phrases like let x equal y or what have you, right? So this is potentially a type of equation that the speaker of the poem is proposing to the reader, right? So that gives us implication that the reader has power, right? That the reader's interpretation of what's going on is indeed important. And that, even though this poem is written, well into the last century, as like 100 years ago or more actually, but not by much. But Stevens is already thinking in what's a very postmodern concept, this idea of the reader's interpretive power in making of meaning, right? Of course, it wasn't new with Stevens. Shakespeare did the same thing, and so on and so forth, but it wasn't sort of writ large like it is today, right? So, um, let there was the speaker is, excuse me, yes, the speaker is inviting us to consider an equation, to accept an equation, to let something be, right? Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear. Now, used is important here. And remember, in poetry, there's a lot of double entendre or double meaning, or in some cases, a vast array of meaning with various terms. In this case, the used is one of those. So used. So used could be like in the past, like I used to attend the University of North Texas, for example, or it could be, you know, I was used in that relationship, right? Or I was, and also important here, I was used in that transaction, right? Um, okay. So this idea of women being devalued, right, or placed into this category as dawdling wenches and then used. And then remember in the previous sentence, previous three lines, we had this whole um setup of very phallic imagery, very male imagery with regard to sexuality, quite graphic, right? And then now we're having women sort of devalued here. Well, no, sort of about it. They are being devalued, I would argue. Um, Bring flowers in last month's newspaper. So what is this? What? So this actually probably requires some explanation as far as cultural context. So first of all, back before we had disposable paper goods and all kinds of stuff like that. If you got the newspaper, right, you wouldn't just throw those newspapers away, right? You would read the newspaper and then you would repurpose that newspaper. And oftentimes, one of the ways to repurpose a newspaper would be to wrap flowers in it, right? Or, I mean, we've all seen um, people repurpose newspapers in various ways. But the idea is that and again, we're also hearkening back to the past, as the dresses they were used to wear and so on, and because it's last month's newspapers. In other words, the the information on the newspapers, right, printed on the newspapers, is no longer relevant or no longer as relevant. So, in a sense, maybe these women, right, being categorized as wenches, they're being categorized as wenches maybe because in the mind of the speaker, right, they're less relevant. They're not at their peak, as it were. Makes me think of that, country song. I can't place the artist, but it says, um, you know, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm good once as I ever was, right? As I near 50 years old, that becomes, more and more relevant in my life. And so, yeah, these women are not at their peak, but they, and neither are the newspapers, right? They've been repurposed to carry flowers. Now, what is the occasion, right, of the boys carrying the flowers, right? So, um, I will explain this, metaphorically speaking, or analogously speaking, by way of talking about an episode of my most favorite television show of all time, King of the Hill. So when Hank and his friends, when they were teenagers, when they won the big game, Cotton, his dad, who is, clearly has the values of the 19th century, not even the 20th century, has some, pretty antiquated values, right? He he takes Hank and his buddies to the Hotel Arlen, right? Um, Such that they would then, engage in intercourse and quote unquote gain their manhood, right? That somehow the loss or the engaging in intercourse somehow makes one an adult, right? Or specifically in a man. Interestingly enough, if you look at the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's that implication is there too, you know, uh, uh, thousands of years ago, right? So anyway, so very traumatic, of course, as the episode of King of the Hill bears out, very traumatic for Hank. But anyway, this is the idea that, like, at a certain, and this is very Victorian, right? This is very Victorian. And as with anything oppressive, right? An oppressive, in American culture, oppressive movements tend to last, they come in from other places or even originate here or whatever. They tend to last longer here, right? We tend to hold on to stuff, and that goes with our Calvinist roots. And we can get into that some other time, perhaps. But regardless of whatever faith one follows in America, one probably is actually Calvinist, because Calvinism is so rooted in everything American, right? And and this is, and so Victorianism really kind of fits with that in the senses that in Victorianism, or in sort of under the culture that sort of thrived in the era of Queen Victoria, right? Basically, women, as far as the enjoyment of sexuality, were supposed to quote unquote lie back and think of England. So women were not supposed to enjoy sexuality. It was a duty that one performed for the sake of family and sake of country. So incident, so males then would go to prostitutes, right? To, I guess, deal with certain biological urges, and so on, right? So that's what this is, right? This is taking your teenage boy to the brothel, right? To and kind of sort of haphazardly, in a mock quote unquote girlfriend experience, right? Taking these flowers in last month's newspapers, to the prostitute, who is, by the assessment of the speaker, not sort of this idealized beautiful woman, right, but rather a dawdling wench, right? These are women who, because of life circumstances, were not able to have the quote unquote American dream of the Victorian era, which is, we're going to get married, we're going to have this family, we're going to be essentially be taken care of, right? For God and country, right? So this is all this here. So we have the rest of the equation here in the last two lines of this stanza, or rather the underlying equation, right? let B be the finale of seem. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. So now, what the heck? So let B be. Um, one of the most sort of elusive, lines in American poetry in like the last however many years, right? Let B be the finale of seem. So let's unpack this a little bit. So again, let is introducing an equation, is inviting an equation, inviting sort of the acceptance of an axiom, or acceptance of a point, right? Let B be. So what is B, right? And that's not a loaded question. Like, what is B? So if I look out my window, you can't see my window right now, but if I look out my window right now, um it's kind of groggy, hazy outside, and so on and so forth. And here's an even better example. If I look at my clock on my computer, it says that it's 2:58 p.m. right now. So it appears based on my computer screen that it is 2:58, right now. I don't have to accept it as 2:58, but it appears to be so now, 2:59. So if I accept what something appears to be, right, then I'm letting B be that, right? So the second B is essentially an equal sign. So let B, let what appears, right? Let what appears to be equal the finale of seem. So finale, of course, is the grand conclusion, right? And then seem is essentially a metaphor for B, right? What something, but it's a less certain version of that. In other words, if I were to say, well, you seem sad today, doesn't mean that you are sad. It means that you appear to be that way. But what this is saying is, let what appears be what something actually is, right? So that's what let B be the finale of seem, again, according to the great Tom Preston. And I haven't seen a better, more convincing, interpretation. Maybe you all will have one. I look forward to that, honestly. But according to Dr. Preston's breakdown of this is that's thing. Um, that's that's where this interesting. Now, the stuff about the male gaze that I'll be talking about, that's mine. Okay, that's my sort of addition to this, but we'll get there. Um, the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. So now, what does this mean, right? So on the surface here, what you got is you got um, a big muscular man who also rolls cigars, whipping up ice cream. Now, we can pretty much surmise, metaphorically speaking, that we're talking about a pimp. But again, on the surface level, we're talking about a dude, whipping up ice cream with his muscles. Now, you're going to take those concupiscent curds, those, that fatty, milky white substance, and you're going to whip that up into something over ice with some sugar, and it's going to be this luscious, delicious treat, right? Um, what happens to ice cream, depending on how hot it is outside and so on, right? Within 5 to 15, 20 minutes, right? It turns into something disgusting and potentially useless, right? The um the ultimate controller of ice cream, the ultimate emperor of ice cream, is potentially uh death or time, right? Or God, right? And of course, in the Bhagavad Gita, for example, Krishna is analogous to death, right? In other words, or time. That, in other words, if you don't meet God in life, everyone meets God as death, right? But in this instance here, what we're talking about is that something, in the older you get, and most of you've already probably come to this conclusion on some level, even if you happen to be 17, 18, right? Some of you have already come to this conclusion that what is enjoyable in life is only enjoyable for a little bit, and then it becomes burdensome or potentially disgusting, right? So, um, or it's like, if you buy something really cool on a credit card, you got to pay that, it ain't gonna be cool paying off that interest, right? It becomes burdensome, and okay. So that's what we have here. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. In other words, the only thing that makes sense, the only mechanism, the only person, entity, if you will, that makes sense is the emperor of ice cream. Whether you want to categorize that as God, whether you want to categorize that as death, whether you want to categorize that as time. But all of us have to contend with God, death, time, etc. Right? Um, you know, if you don't believe in a literal God, that's fine. But thinking of, the contention with time, or the contention with death as a God-like um inevitability, right, is what's here, right? And again, you'll see from other Stevens poems, he has his working out of of his own relationship with divinity is a major endeavor on his part. Supposedly, he converts to Catholicism on his deathbed in 1954, but that's again up for debate. But I will say, at this point when he's writing this, he is definitely not Roman Catholic. Okay, uh, so or Christian by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, um, or follower of Sanatana Dharma or Buddhist or anything. Okay, well, so let's move on to the next stanza, because there's still a lot to unpack here, right? Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the three glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once, and spread it so as to cover her face. All right, so the scene has changed, right? The stanzas changed, the scene has changed. Um, take from the dresser of deal. So this is there's a double entendre here, right? Because deal, there's two meaning, and I believe there's two different spellings, but deal, there's two different meanings here that come into play. One is there's a wood called deal that sort of inexpensive hope chests, right, would be built. Now, hope chest gets back into that Victorian notion, right? That women, young girls, actually, young girls, as they would be growing up, each for every special occasion, birthdays, and so on, they'd be given items to put in this chest. And the idea was that when they would get married, they would take this chest with them, and it would have items that they would need for their marriage within this chest. So there would be hope chest, right? In other words, they would be hoping to be married, hoping to be essentially taken care of, to have children and so on, right? So take from the dresser of deal. Now, deal also is what it sounds like. It's, we're gonna slap some money down on the dresser, right? Here's the money. Here is the transaction, right? Lacking the three glass knobs. Now, so this dresser is in disrepair, right? It's old, right? It's 40, 50, however many years old. It's falling apart, right? Just like the desk that I have my laptop on right now, and talking to you right now. I don't know how old it is, but it is definitely lacking at least one knob. Okay. Um, so again, old. It's, in other words, it's not a holder of hope, really. It is, in fact, the opposite. It's like, hope was long ago, right? Right. The ice cream was long ago, right? Okay. Um, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once. Now, out of the chest, they're pulling a sheet. And so, again, hope chest, the idea is that there would be items put in that chest, and maybe she, and this is indicating that the woman had embroidered the fantails on it. And the idea, again, is preparing for married life, right? Um, and that sheet would be used on the marriage bed and so forth. Now, the embroidering of fantails is interesting. This is something that Dr. Preston pointed out in his lecture in Low in 1997 or 98, right? Probably 98, 99, actually, probably 99. Okay, but just to give you some context to how long ago we were talking about, right? But yes, I am that old. But anyway, uh, so in ice cream shops of the day, right? Of Wallace Stevens say, yeah, it's in ice cream shops now. This has kind of come back into fashion. You might have a little chip of cone, a little bit of ice cream cone in the shape of a tail, sticking out of your bowl, sticking out of your ice cream bowl, because to go and get ice cream back in the day, when people didn't have freezers in their house and things like that, it was a big deal. Hey, it's a hot day. We're going to go and get some ice cream. And ice cream was considered really, really decadent. Like it was a big deal. It was considered incredibly scandalous that there was an ice cream dessert, right? There was an ice cream confection, I should, called a sundae, right? Because you can't call something decadent Sunday, because that's when you go to church. Can't do it, right? That was that was the mentality, right? So that's why Sunday still to this day is spelled with an IE, right? Not a Y. Okay, because certain church folk got extremely upset. You can't have this delicious dessert called Sunday, right? But psychologically, though, you would think they would accept that, because hey, if you're eating a delicious dessert called a sundae and you're getting some endorphins from that, and you think, hey, I like Sundays. I think I'm gonna get up and go to church. But no, they didn't think like that. Anyway, um, so again, another sort of veiled reference to ice cream there, and spread it so as to cover her face. Now, they're taking the sheet out and they're gonna put it over this woman's face. Now, on what occasion does one cover one's face with a hat, or is someone's face covered, right? With a sheet. Uh, Typically when they're dead, right? That's done out of respect, or to acknowledge that someone's dead. There's not much respect here for this woman, as we get with the next line. I'm gonna read the next sentence, which is encompasses the next two lines. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Okay, I ended up reading the whole poem there, but I'll back up. So if her horny feet protrude, they come. Let's just focus on that line, right? So horny feet, you can you can ex- you can guess where I'm going. At this point, you can guess where I'm going. So horny has meant horny for, you know, hundreds of years, right? We're not, we didn't, our couple of generations that are on this, listening to this video, watching this video, did not create that reference, right? That predates us, at least to Stephen's time and before, right? So there's that, but also her feet were not in good condition, right? She didn't have the means to take, again, she didn't have the financial means. She didn't have the leisure, right? The time to take care of her feet. She wasn't getting pedicures, right? Okay. They come, and I'll just leave it at that. Okay. to show how cold she is and dumb. So she's cold because she dead, right? I mean, that's she dead, right? And dumb, dumb meaning she is not speaking, right? But also it's an insult to her intelligence. And this is where I'm going to get into the male gaze here in a little bit. But think about that. It's saying that she doesn't speak, but it's also an insult to her intelligence. Insult to her intelligence because she again, according to the speaker, or it's an insult to her intelligence because she found herself in this predicament, right? Let the lamp affix its beam. So what the hell lamp are we talking about here? Now, probably, potentially, it's a coroner's lamp. The coroner comes out, depending, and again, country, potentially country town, whatever the, who the coroner is or whatever, and whatever that procedure is, and whatever it varies, right? But the coroner, somebody's going to come out and pronounce her dead, and they're going to like shine a light on her, make sure that she is in fact dead, right? So that is the beam, probably, that she appears to be dead, right? There's a finality here, right? But also, and here's where my bit comes in, that beam is the male gaze, right? That beam is really incredibly brutal, right? This, because it's not granting this woman any kind of reprieve here. In other words, she is being blamed basically for her being in this situation, essentially dying as a middle-aged prostitute, right? And I don't think that's fair. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. I don't think that's fair. I think that, people in that position, particularly that at that time, given the late Victorian era, given the 1920, 1919, so on, right? There was no social welfare of any kind, except maybe from, like, sponsored by church organizations and so forth, and they did not look kindly on prostitutes. Okay. um and so on, and so I really don't think that that's fair. But again, you're looking at a very you know the power in society at that time, and arguably still, is very much centered in a male context, and in a male gaze, and in a male hetero context, and in a male white context. And I'm saying that as a white dude, right? I mean, I'm quite sure that I've gotten certain privileges because I'm white. I have a dear friend who's a world class scientist. That when he was 10 years old, he was a gangster. He used to break into homes and break into all kinds of stuff. And it was him and some African American friends of his. He got told go home. His African American friends were taken to jail, right? Um, and this was in a very conservative area of the United States. But and this was not that long ago. This was in the 1980s. Okay. And so we're me saying not that long ago, meaning we're talking about a poem that's 100 years old here. So, time is relative, right? So anyway, um, but that male gaze in this context is my point before, is that the men, the boys that became men, that were my friends back when he was 10 years old, they didn't become world class scientists, right? Because they developed early on, developed, like records, in connections with um, incarceration and stuff like that. Whereas my friend was just told to go home, and because he's white. That's no other, because he was a white kid, instead of a black kid, you know. So don't think we live in a post-racist racial era and all that crap. Because we don't. Okay. Um, And I'm not saying, I'm not telling, I'm not saying what, I'm not saying that any, what any kind of political ideology or whatever can fix it. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying we don't live in a post-racial era. And in this era, and we don't live in a post-sexist era either, or a post, you know, heteronormative era. We don't, you know, we can make strides in certain ways, and we can, but really, it is very, very hard out there for folks who um, are divergent, really, in any way. Like you can't see here, but I'm physically disabled, and so I see the world. I experience the world in different ways than people who are quote unquote able-bodied, right? Um. Anyway, so we have this lamp affixing its beam, right? But the speaker doesn't really want to call in question, in a way, to the way things are. I mean, by writing this, right, the poet is calling things into question in many ways, but the speaker and the poet are not the same, right? The speaker and the poet are not the same, um, or they don't necessarily have to be, right? And so that's something that that we want to hold and we want to think about when we're reading through poems. So, and then finally, it's like, let the only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. In other words, the only as Marvin Gaye said, only three things are for sure: taxes, death, and trouble. This I know, right? So the only thing that's certain is death, but the only thing that's certain, if you will, is time, death, time, or God, right? Or and, you know, right? And so outside of that, there is no certainty, right? And I think ultimately, illustrated through this woman who's now dead, and she's being called dumb or foolish, right? Dumb or foolish because of the predicament that she's in, but also dumb and foolish because she put her faith in a system that was not going to work for her. She she hoped to get married, to have the dream, if you will, but she's dumb, she's foolish because that dream didn't happen. In other words, the only real certainty, right, is in fact death. Right? That's what this sort of poem is getting at. And so again, um, my apologies for my sort of tangents that I went off on there, which if you watched any of my other videos, you're used to at this point. Or if you've taken a class with me in person, you're definitely used to that. But you know, and again, shout out to the late Tom Preston, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.